Brother Black, a gospel preacher for many years. Preached a sermon one time in a gospel meeting I heard him in. And I think most preachers have an outline with that heading, Sin in the Camp. Why did we overcome Jericho and were defeated at Ai? And God gave a very clear answer, you sinned. How many people that there were in the company of Israel this time, we don't know. Conjecture is that there must have been between 1 and 3 million people of the Israelites. And because of one sin, God calls them to judgment. And this is something that has always amazed me and that always points back to the power of God. He calls out a tribe in Israel. And he points out that the sin is by a person representative of that tribe. And the man's name is Achan. But what did he do? God tells us that from the city of Jericho, he had taken a wedge of gold, he had taken silver, and he had taken a Babylonish garment. He had taken those 3 items and he had buried them under a carpet in his tent. God demands of that man that he makes known what he has done. Have you ever been acquainted with anybody that held the view that if I sin, it doesn't affect anybody else? Back in the days of so-called prohibition in Lauderdale County of the sale of alcoholic beverages, during one of our heated campaigns, I had a member of the church to tell me, well, I can buy my spirit and carry it home and put it in my refrigerator, and it doesn't bother anybody else. I asked him, what about your wife? What about your children? What about the church? What about the community? What about yourself? That was what Achan evidently had thought. When he saw these things, over in the 7th chapter of the book of Joshua, where this is recorded, Achan points out the steps that were involved in his sinful activity. When they went in to the city of Ai and were defeated, he made it known to Joshua when the judgment came. He said, when we were at Jericho, I saw those things. I saw that wedge of gold. I saw the silver. I saw the Babylonish garment. And I coveted. I wanted it. pioneer preacher in the church many years ago that it was his perception that most people would be condemned in the day of judgment over the problem of covetousness. There are people in this country that will ruin their health to get something. When I was in college, I worked at Reynolds one summer. And the man who was supervisor over we college students that would be working for just the summer boasted and one time even showed his check that he had received from Reynolds because of all of the work that he had done. How many shifts of work he had done. How many shifts in a row of work he had done. And folks, the man, as the older folk would say, looked like walking death. He had that, but he sacrificed his health. That's what covetousness will do to a person. Being covetous is simply that desire to have something at any cost. I'll do anything to possess that. Achan said, I coveted. I wanted that. And I wanted it so bad that I violated the commandment of God. And I took it. I believe that's in verse 21 of Joshua chapter 7, somewhere thereabouts. I saw it, I coveted, and I took it. Go to the time of David. In a time of leisure, he saw a woman by the name of Bathsheba who was bathing herself. And the same three things that caused the downfall of Achan caused the downfall of David. He saw her, he coveted her, and he took her. Even to the point of having the death of her husband set up. To where David thought, she'll be free now from any ties to the husband. So bring her to me, she shall be my wife. Now go back just a moment to the time of Achan. The sin of Achan destroyed his entire family. When the judgment was rendered, you take Achan, you take all of his family, you take all of his possessions, and you stone those with a live. Stone those, and then you burn them. Showing us that the sin that we commit in our lives doesn't just affect our lives, it affects others. David did things that would move God to make the statement that the sword shall never leave your house. that there would forever be violence in the earthly family of David. From the time that God made that statement until the day you might say that David died, that took place. So what do we do in this age? When we look at the lives of these men, and there are others as well. Or you could even take the example of Ahab and his wife Jezebel. That Ahab had a covetous feeling for the vineyards that belonged to Naboth. And gave every kind of excuse you could think of to obtain them, finally did. And as a result of that, and the work of his wife Jezebel, violence caused their destruction. What would we do in this age if God dealt with us now as He did those folks? When Nathan the prophet brought to the attention of David that David had sinned, it appears that first of all, David couldn't understand, well, who did this? What did Nathan say? Thou art the man. You're the one that did it. How easy it is. And we see this in politics a whole lot. Something goes wrong, what do? Blame somebody else. I've never seen much of this, but I've seen some of it. Take 2 or 3 children, and they're playing, and something happens that shouldn't happen. Who usually gets the blame? The little bitty person that cannot defend himself. That's what Eve tried to do. That's what Adam tried to do. When God was trying to reconcile Adam and Eve to Him, Adam said, "Now God, that woman you gave me, she presented that forbidden fruit to me, and I partook." Blaming the wife. Who did the wife blame? She blamed the serpent. Who did the serpent blame? There was nobody to blame but Eve herself, Adam himself. How easy it is to be reconciled to God immediately instead of trying to find excuses. When Maddie and I lived in Lexington, there was a man in that community, had been a member of the church a long period of time, although he obeyed the gospel when he was older. And he said, "Preacher, I remember back when I was a whole lot younger, and different individuals were trying to persuade me to be obedient to the truth." He said it was always easy to blame somebody else. He said, one day I realized, as he called him to a big man, you're going to have to do this yourself. Wasn't that what the prodigal son kind of said? Wasted everything. Got to a point that he was near destruction. I know what I will do. I will arise and I will go to my father and I will tell him that I have sinned in his sight and am no more worthy to be called his son. Just make me a hired servant. In the example of the rich farmer, didn't have anywhere to bestow the fruits of his harvest. I know what I'll do. I'll pull down these barns and I'll build greater. And I will tell to my soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. The I prospect in anybody's life is dangerous. And the examples are numerous in the Bible. Turn sometimes to the book of Proverbs and to see how many times that is pointed out. And as a result of that, in order for us to satisfy the I condition, we have to blame somebody else. And Achan had his entire family destroyed because of what he had done. Over the years, and I've heard it very few times, with even people who will blame God. In the crucifixion, when Christ was on the cross, what did he mean when he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Christ had gotten to the point that it was prophesied that he would face. All of the prophecies pertaining to the crucifixion were not to be made null and void. Previous to that, the Lord had been in the garden. And what did he pray for? He didn't want to die, did he? I would imagine that you could go to a street corner anywhere, take a pencil and paper, and people walk by. Do you want to die? No, 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 no. And not that very seriously, if you'd have anybody to say, well, yes. You had to put it on him. That was the manner in which Satan tried to get to Job. One of the most prosperous men, probably, who has ever lived. Very rich man. We know he was an influential person. But what did Satan say to God relative to Job and death? Over life. Most folks would, wouldn't they? But every time that something of an adverse nature affected Job, what did he do? In a way, he thanked God. You took my children. You took all of my possessions. You left this wife here. And she suggested to me that I go ahead and curse you and die. Lord, what do I do now? But the Bible says that in all of those things, Job didn't say anything to try to hurt God. He was hurt on every hand. But he didn't hurt anybody. To me, one of the most notable scriptures with that in mind is Isaiah chapter, as we have it in chapter 53. That is the chapter from which the Ethiopian eunuch was reading when Philip intercepted his chariot. If you start in the first book of Isaiah, chapter 53, and read through the entirety of that chapter, qualities of the Lord himself are mentioned. And for whom did he do that? Isaiah the prophet, moving as he was moved by God, said, God's doing that for his creation. A man who would be beaten, they would spit upon him, they would do anything just short of death to him, which eventually led to death. For who? He did it for us. What if God had genuinely forsaken the Lord? Suppose that God had not had a plan for this lamb that would take away the sin of the world. Sometimes we very flippantly make that statement. In the Old Dispensation, sacrifices were made to do what? To sin. To roll them forward. Once each year, the high priest would go into the most holy place, engage in activities that would roll forward the sins of the people of God. But what did the death of the Lord bring? A washing away immediately of sin. I was reading a couple of weeks ago statements made by earlier for philosophers And sometimes we think, well, most of our renowned philosophers were deists. That is, they believed that God created things, set everything in motion, and then he left it. Suppose that was the case. We've had political figures like that in the past that believed in deism. And one of them, a long time ago, stated, it's kind of like winding up a clock. Back when you wound the clock up, or the watch, didn't have batteries back then, so you just wind it up under a spring system, and it keeps time. But after a while, it's going to wind down. And they surmised that as a deist, that's what I believe, that God created things, he left it alone, and after a while, it'll all run down. It won't exist anymore. Now, let me ask you this, what kind of God would that be? A God who is eternal. As he said of himself, I am from everlasting to everlasting. In the book of Leviticus, he said, I am holy, therefore you should be holy. Why would a being like that express himself in such a way if he would limit himself? That watch gets to the point that it may not be repairable. You wind it up and you wind it up. Somebody said, I got a 10-day clock here. Wind that thing up. 10 days, it operates all right, but I got to wind it up again. The time will come when that person will not be able to successfully wind it up, and it will work because it's dead.